She thought she knew everything about God, about life after death, about what awaited her when her time came, until an unexpected accident changed absolutely everything. Prepare yourself to hear an astonishing account that challenged all the beliefs she carried for an entire lifetime. My name is Lena Qureshi. I am 47 years old, and I live in a simple but comfortable house on the outskirts of Grand Rapids, Michigan. I spent most of my adult life here, building a quiet routine alongside my husband, Yasir, and our 2 teenage children. Before everything changed, I was just another ordinary mother, dividing my time between family and work. As a pharmacy technician at a local CVS, I grew up in a devout Muslim household. From a young age, I learned that faith was the foundation of everything. I prayed 5 times a day, fasted during Ramadan, and made every effort to follow the religious teachings that my parents brought with them when they immigrated from Pakistan to the United States. They made sure to preserve our traditions, ensuring that even far from our homeland, our culture and our faith remained intact. That winter morning began like any other. I woke up early for work, preparing breakfast for the kids, while the TV whispered the headlines of the day. A warning about an impending snowstorm went unnoticed in the midst of my rush. What I didn't know was that something invisible was already inside the house, silently threatening my life and that of my family. While I finished preparing the kids' lunchboxes, a slight dizziness began to emerge. I felt a weight in my head, as if I was running out of air, but I ignored it. I attributed it to fatigue, or maybe the lack of coffee. My daughter Mariam, who was sitting at the table, rubbed her temple and complained of a headache. "Mum, I think I'm not feeling well. Can I stay home today?" My son, Ryan, was already upstairs, getting ready to take a shower before school. Yasir had left earlier for work at the engineering firm where he worked, as he did every morning. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. What I didn't know was that, for weeks, our carbon monoxide detector had not been working. The batteries had run out, and between the daily tasks, both Yasir and I had forgotten to change them. Our old heating system had been showing signs of wear for some time, and an imperceptible crack in the heat exchanger allowed a deadly, odorless gas to slowly spread throughout the house. The poison was already in our air, and every breath was taking us closer to collapse. My dizziness worsened as I carried the dishes to the sink. The world began to spin, and my vision became blurry, as if I were looking through a dirty glass. My body felt heavy, and my hands trembled as I tried to grab my phone. An alarm went off in my mind. Something was terribly wrong. I tried to dial the emergency number, but my fingers were numb and didn't obey. The last sound I heard was Mariam's trembling voice, calling me in desperation. Then, everything went dark. What happened next, I only learned later. Despite feeling weak, Mariam mustered the strength to grab the phone and call emergency services. If it weren't for that, perhaps this story would have had a completely different ending. The firefighters arrived in minutes, and when they entered the house, the sensors immediately detected dangerously high levels of carbon monoxide in the air. There was no time to lose. They quickly removed us, me unconscious in the kitchen, Mariam barely able to stand, and Ryan passed out in the shower. We were rushed to the ambulance. My condition was the most critical. The paramedics tried to stabilize my vital signs, but at some point, while the siren cut through the cold silence of that morning, my heart simply stopped. For exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, I was clinically dead. But within that brief period, what I experienced felt like an eternity. Before that day, I believed I understood everything about life after death. Since I was a child, I had been taught that upon dying, a person would face Judgment Day, and their actions on earth would be weighed on a divine scale. If their deeds were good, they would find reward. If not, they would face punishment. I never questioned these beliefs. I never had a reason to doubt. But what I experienced while my body lay lifeless in that ambulance shattered all the certainties I had carried since childhood. There was no tunnel of light. There was no angel gently welcoming me. What happened was far more intense, and terrifying. Suddenly, I was ripped from the darkness. It was as if my spirit had been jerked out of my body in a frozen shock, as if someone had plunged me into an ice-cold lake without warning. The shock ran through every part of my being. I was there, but not in my body. I floated above the scene, observing everything with a clarity I had never experienced before. Below me, inside the ambulance, I saw the paramedics desperately trying to bring me back. "We've lost vital signs. Prepare the defibrillator," one of them shouted. I could see every detail of that scene with surreal precision. The wires of the electrodes stuck to my skin. The tense expression on the youngest paramedic's face, a small coffee stain on his uniform sleeve. Even the ceiling of the ambulance, which I would have never noticed in life, had a crack in the exact shape of a question mark. But what impressed me the most wasn't what I saw, it was what I felt. No fear, no pain, just a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie about someone else. Then everything went dark. But it wasn't an ordinary darkness. It wasn't like closing your eyes. It was something alive, dense, heavy, as if it had its own substance. And in that emptiness I realized I was not alone. There was a presence with me, something ancient, powerful, overwhelming. It wasn't a figure with wings and an angelic face like I had always imagined angels. It was something much larger. Its mere existence made every fiber of my being tremble. Without using words, this presence began to show me something. And in that instant, my past, my beliefs, my entire life began to unfold before my eyes in a way I could have never imagined. What I saw next left me speechless. The presence beside me didn't speak with an audible voice, but it conveyed knowledge to me in a way that was impossible to ignore. It was as if images, feelings, and entire truths were injected directly into my mind without the need for explanation. My entire life passed before me, but it wasn't like recalling old moments. It was different. I didn't just see my actions, I felt the effects they had on others. I remembered an ordinary day at the pharmacy when a co-worker seemed to be having a tough time. I was rushed, tired, and barely paid attention to her. Now, seeing this moment from the outside, I realized that my coldness only worsened her day, making her feel even more alone and unmotivated. On the other hand, I saw another scene, a day when I helped an elderly woman find her medication and patiently listened to her tell a story about her grandson. At the time, it seemed small to me, but now I saw the real impact of that kindness. That woman, who had felt invisible and forgotten, went home that night with a little more hope in her heart. Every choice, every word, every omission created invisible waves, echoing in people's lives in ways I had never imagined. But what really took my breath away was seeing how my faith influenced others. I had always considered myself a religious person, a devout woman who followed everything the right way. I taught my children to pray, encouraged friends to be more rigorous in practicing their faith, and corrected those who, in my view, weren't following the commandments correctly. But then, the truth was exposed before me. What I thought I was doing to bring people closer to God, I was actually pushing them away. I saw the doubtful looks of those who tried to question certain dogmas, but silenced them for fear of being wrong. I saw friends who, instead of finding peace in faith, drowned in guilt and fear, believing they would never be good enough. And in that moment, I wanted to argue. I wanted to say that I was just trying to be faithful, that I only wanted to follow what I had been taught. But in the presence of that being, all my justifications sounded empty, because deep down, I knew the truth. The faith I followed so rigidly wasn't the complete truth. And then, the presence showed me something even deeper. I was about to see things I never imagined. What came next made me question everything I believed was unquestionable. The presence beside me took me even deeper into this unknown space. Suddenly, it was no longer just my life I saw. It was the story of humanity. It was as if a veil was being lifted before my eyes, revealing truths I had never considered. I saw historical figures, events that seemed distorted or hidden in the world of the living. And then I was taken to a moment that shocked me. I saw the birth of my own faith, but not as I had been taught. I saw how certain aspects had been shaped over time, altered, adapted, manipulated. I saw religious leaders making decisions not by divine revelation, but by political influence. I saw distorted teachings, erased truths, messages transformed to serve interests that had nothing to do with spirituality. And then I saw something I never thought I would see. I saw the true face of Jesus. But he was not just a prophet, he was not just a holy man. His presence was so intense, so full of love and truth, that everything I believed I knew about him crumbled in that instant. I felt an indescribable love coming from him, something no human word could explain. In that moment, I knew that everything I had been taught about him was incomplete. He was not just a messenger, he was the very answer. And then the presence beside me did something that left me even more breathless. It showed me the destiny of souls, and what I saw changed my life forever. What I saw next was terrifying and overwhelming. The presence beside me made me look around, and suddenly I was no longer in that emptiness. There were souls around me, thousands, perhaps millions. Some were being pulled upward towards an indescribable light, while others were being sucked downward, disappearing into an ever-deepening darkness. What was most frightening was that it didn't seem random. Each soul was being drawn according to what they believed in, according to the choices they made in life. I saw people who, like me, had followed their beliefs with complete devotion, convinced they were on the right path, and yet they were moving away from the light. Their despair was heartbreaking. They called out the names of their prophets, repeated their prayers, clung to their beliefs, but there was no answer. I saw familiar faces, people from my own circle. I saw religious leaders I respected, figures who had devoted their lives to faith, and yet they were being led away from the light. I saw brothers and sisters who prayed every day, who fasted, who followed all the rules, but who never truly knew the truth. And that's when I saw myself. My own spirit was there, watching everything, feeling the weight of every choice I had made. And then I looked at myself and saw something that made me shudder. There were chains around me. They were beautiful, intertwined with symbols and words I knew well. They were made of the beliefs I had carried throughout my life. But now I understood. These chains were not protecting me. They were imprisoning me. And if I didn't break these links, I knew what my fate would be. The presence beside me transmitted one last piece of knowledge before taking me forward. It's not over yet. And then we moved toward the light, and everything changed again. As I moved toward the light, I felt something change within me. The chains that bound me began to dissolve, as if the truth I was discovering was freeing every part of my being. The light wasn't just light. It was alive. It knew me. It wasn't just a distant glow. It was a presence, a consciousness, a love so intense that it flowed through me like an overwhelming river. And then I saw him, Jesus. But not as I had been taught, not as a simple prophet, not just as a man. He was before me in indescribable glory, and the moment I saw him, I knew the truth. He was more than I had been taught. He was the answer. He was God. I didn't need to ask. I didn't need an explanation. The truth hit me like thunder. He had always been there. I just had never looked at him the right way. And in that moment, everything I thought I knew fell apart like dust in the wind. I saw scenes that made me understand who he really was. I saw his crucifixion, something I had always been taught never happened, but there it was, real, true. I saw his resurrection, the impact he had on the world, who he had always been. I saw how, over the centuries, many tried to hide, distort, and modify his message, but the truth was still there, intact. And then a question burned inside me. Why didn't I see this before? And that's when I was taken to see something even deeper, the origin of the deception. I was about to discover how so many souls had been diverted. What came next left me speechless. The presence beside me took me even deeper, and then I saw how the truth had been hidden over the centuries. I saw how the deception had been carefully constructed, piece by piece, over time. I saw how the truths about Jesus had been distorted, transformed, rewritten to fit human narratives. I saw the birth of beliefs created not by divine revelation, but by political decisions, power struggles, human agendas. And what shook me the most was realizing that I, too, had spent my entire life within this system without ever questioning it. I saw figures I respected shaping the faith of millions without even knowing the truth completely. I saw prophets being elevated to positions they should never have occupied. I saw sincere people being led down the wrong path, not because they were bad, but because they never had the chance to see beyond what they had been taught. And then I realized the great tragedy of it all. Many souls were being separated from the light, not by malice, but by ignorance. The truth had always been there, but so many refused to see it. And now the question burned inside me. If all of this was a lie, then what was the truth? That's when the presence showed me something even deeper. I saw the destiny of souls, and what I witnessed broke my heart in a way words could never describe. I was taken to a place where time seemed to not exist. It was as if I were hovering over an abyss, looking at something that could never be explained in human words. Below me, there were thousands, not millions, of souls moving in different directions. Some were rising toward the light, their glow growing brighter as they drew near, but others were sinking deeper into the darkness. And what frightened me the most was recognizing some of them. I saw familiar faces, people who had been religious leaders, devout practitioners, men and women who had dedicated their lives to faith, and yet they were being pulled away from the light. Their eyes were filled with despair, as if, for the first time, they realized that everything they believed was incomplete. Their voices echoed in the darkness. They called out the names of their prophets. They recited prayers. They begged for mercy. But there was no answer, because the answer had already been given during their lives. What hurt me the most was seeing parents separated from their children. I saw children rising to the light, their souls pure, free from the weight of false beliefs. But their parents, they couldn't follow them. The chains that bound them were made of what they had chosen to believe. And in that moment, they understood they were bound to something that was never the complete truth. I saw a woman I recognized from my own community. She had always been kind, dedicated to her faith, helping the needy, teaching others about religious principles. But now, she was there, her eyes filled with tears, realizing that everything she had followed throughout her life had not led her to the destiny she expected. And then, I was forced to face my own destiny. I looked at myself and saw that those same chains I had seen before were still there, around me. They were made of what I had always carried with me, the beliefs I defended without questioning, the teachings I never allowed to be challenged, the traditions I followed blindly. And I knew, if I didn't free myself now, I would follow the same path. The presence beside me made me understand that I still had a choice. And in that moment, I was filled with a single thought. What do I need to do to be free? The answer came in a way I never expected. The light before me shone even brighter, and then I heard his voice. Jesus was about to show me the way. The light before me shone even brighter, and then I heard his voice. Come to me. These weren't just words. It was a call. The moment I heard it, everything inside me shattered. Every doubt, every teaching that held me back, every barrier I had built against this truth simply crumbled. I saw Jesus as I had never seen him before. I saw his hands marked by sacrifice. I saw his eyes full of a compassion so deep that my heart felt too small to contain it. And I understood. He was not just a prophet. He was not just a holy man. He was God. The very God I had sought my entire life was standing there before me, and I realized that everything I had done, all the prayers I had said, all the rules I had followed, had never been enough to bring me to him. Because it wasn't about rules, it was about relationship. It was about recognizing that no matter how hard I tried, I could never reach perfection on my own. And then I saw something even deeper. I saw the cross. I saw Jesus being crucified. Something I had been taught never happened, but now there, in front of the absolute truth, I saw it with my own eyes. He died, he resurrected, and I understood. This was the way. There was no other. Salvation did not come from following laws and traditions. Salvation came from him, and then I knew I had to choose. I would either accept this truth or I would return to my old life, pretending none of this had happened. The presence beside me made it clear. I had to decide. And my answer was immediate. I want to be free. The moment I said that, the chains around me disappeared. The truth set me free. And then I knew my journey wasn't over. I had to return. I had to tell the world what I had seen. But before I returned, I was shown something that revealed the true cost of the choice I was about to make. I saw what would happen when I went back to Earth, and what awaited me there would not be easy. The moment I made my decision, the light around me seemed to engulf my entire being. I was free, free from the chains of religion without understanding, free from the beliefs that kept me from the truth, free to finally see who God truly was. But then I was shown something that made me shudder. The presence beside me showed me what awaited me when I returned. I saw my house, my family. I saw Yassir's reaction when I tried to tell him what I had experienced. I saw the shock in my children's eyes. I saw friends turning away. I saw the community that had once embraced me turning its back on me. I saw looks of distrust. I saw accusations. I saw people calling me a traitor, crazy, lost. And above all, I saw the pain I would cause to those I loved. My family would never accept this change easily. And then I saw something even harder to face. I saw the dangers. I saw threats. I saw rejection turning into hostility. I saw people I had known for years becoming my greatest opponents, and the question arose in my heart, is it worth it? I knew what this choice meant. I would lose a lot. Maybe I would lose everything. But then I saw something that made me forget all fear. I saw the lives that would be transformed by what I was about to tell. I saw people who, like me, had lived trapped in an incomplete faith, finally finding the truth. I saw hearts being set free. I saw those who had doubted finally finding the answer they had been seeking. I saw light where there had once been darkness. And then I understood. Yes, it would be worth it. Every tear, every rejection, every struggle. And it was at that moment that the presence beside me asked me one final question. Are you ready to return? I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Yes. And then everything disappeared. The darkness dissipated. The light faded. And suddenly I was back. Returning was like being forcefully torn away from a place of absolute peace. Suddenly, my body felt heavy, suffocated by intense pain. My lungs burned, my head throbbed, and as I opened my eyes, I was greeted by the bright lights of the hospital. I was back. The first thing I saw was Yassir holding my hand, his eyes red from crying. Mariam and Ryan were there, beside the bed, the fear and relief mixed on their faces. I tried to speak, but my voice came out weak, as though I had passed through an endless desert. The doctors entered the room shortly after, explaining what had happened. I had been technically dead for over 4 minutes. The exposure to carbon monoxide had almost taken my life, but I had returned, and I knew it wasn't luck. It wasn't a coincidence. I had been sent back for a reason. The moment the doctors left, I looked at Yassir and my children. I needed to tell them. I needed to say what I had seen, but as soon as the words began to leave my mouth, I realized something that made my heart sink. They weren't ready to hear. Yassir frowned, exchanging worried glances with Mariam and Rayan. "Dear," You went through something very traumatic. It was the lack of oxygen that can cause hallucinations. Hallucinations. They thought I was confused, that what I was saying wasn't real. But I knew it was more real than anything I'd ever experienced. Still, I didn't insist. I knew this battle wouldn't be won in one day, but my life would never be the same, and I was about to discover the price of carrying this truth. The following days were the hardest of my life. I still felt weak, my body slowly recovering from the carbon monoxide poisoning. But nothing hurt more than the veiled rejection from those around me. Yasir avoided talking about what I had shared in the hospital. Every time I mentioned my experience, he would change the subject or leave the room. Mariam and Rayan listened, but with doubtful expressions, as if they were trying to figure out if their mother had really gone through something supernatural or if it was just a result of the lack of oxygen. But I knew I couldn't stay silent. I started reading the Bible. Every page seemed to come alive before my eyes. The verses that had once been taught to me in a distorted way now made sense in an overwhelming way. I began to understand Jesus was not just a prophet. He was the very way to God. And then I made the hardest decision of all. I stopped going to the mosque. At first, Yasir said nothing, but when I started visiting a local church, the tension in our house became unbearable. "This is just a phase. You're confused," he said one night, trying to hide the frustration in his voice. "No, Yasir, I'm not confused. For the first time in my life, I see everything clearly." He looked at me as though I were a stranger, as if the woman he married had disappeared before his eyes. And then the whispers began. Friends distancing themselves, neighbors looking at me with distrust, messages arriving on my phone, some with concern, others filled with anger. But I knew this was just the beginning. The real fight was still ahead. What came next was even more painful than I had imagined. The weeks passed, and little by little my life began to fall apart. The news of my change spread quickly throughout the community. People who once called me sister now looked at me with suspicion, as if I had committed an unforgivable betrayal. The invitations to gatherings disappeared. The messages of support were replaced by silence. And at home, the rift between Yasir and me deepened each day. He tried to understand, but deep down, I saw the fear in his eyes. Fear that his wife had lost her mind, fear of what others would say, fear that everything he had always believed was wrong. Mariam started asking questions. She saw my transformation. She could tell I was no longer the same. "Mom, what if what you saw is real?" she asked one night, with a hesitant tone. My heart filled with hope. "It was real, daughter, and one day you will see too." But Rayan was different. He distanced himself. I saw confusion and anger in his gaze. For him, I wasn't just changing. I was destroying everything he knew. And then came the final blow. The imam from our mosque showed up at our door. He came out of concern, but I knew what that meant. He wanted me to deny what I had experienced. He wanted me to say it was a delusion, a deception, a passing phase. But I couldn't. I could never deny the truth again. And that's when I realized if I went forward, I would lose everything. But even knowing that, there was no turning back. I had to keep going, because now I knew what was truly at stake. The conversation with the imam was the breaking point. He tried to convince me that I was being deceived, that Satan had placed those visions in my mind. But I knew the truth. Nothing, he said, could erase what I had experienced. After that, the rejection became definitive. The looks on the street changed. The smiles disappeared. People who once considered me a friend now saw me as a threat. But the most painful part was at home. Yasir could no longer look at me the same way. Our conversations became brief, filled with silence. The weight of the choice I had made was destroying everything around me. And then he said the words I feared to hear. "Lena, I don't know if I can continue with this." He didn't need to explain. I understood. Our marriage was hanging by a thread. But despite the pain, I knew if this was the cross I had to carry, then I would carry it. Because now I belonged to the truth, and nothing could make me turn back. The following months were a test of faith. Yasir and I grew more and more distant. He tried to ignore my transformation at first, but when he realized this wasn't just a phase, something inside him broke. Mariam started reading the Bible in secret. She wouldn't openly admit it, but I saw the questions forming in her eyes. She was beginning to see. Rayan, on the other hand, completely shut down. He avoided me, and every time I tried to talk about my experience, he pulled further away. And then the threats came. Anonymous messages, whispers in the community, people saying that I had dishonored my family, that I was bringing shame to everyone around me. But at the same time, something incredible began to happen. Others began to seek me out, people who also had doubts, people who felt there was something more, but never had the courage to question. And one day, I received my greatest confirmation. Mariam came to me with tears in her eyes. "Mom," I prayed. "To who, daughter?" I asked, my heart racing. She smiled. "To Jesus." That was when I knew that everything I had lost was worth it. Today, my house is a refuge for those seeking the truth. There are still struggles. There are still fights. But I am no longer afraid, because now I know I was sent back for a reason. And as long as I live, I will not stop telling this truth. If this video has touched your heart, like it and share it. You never know who may need to hear this message today. Leave in the comments below where you're watching from. We have videos every day, and I'll see you tomorrow at the same time. Subscribe.